Well, hello, I'm Doug Apple, back with another special interview for you today. And here in Florida, we just came off of our primary election, and I'm looking at this PBS News headline. It says, "Progressive scores upset victory in Florida," and other takeaways from Tuesday's elections. That caught my attention because, according to PBS, in this story anyway, the top story of the election cycle was the progressive, what they called progressive, scoring an upset victory in Florida. And then it features a huge photo of a very happy Angie Nixon, who won the Democratic primary for U.S. Senate. And this is just to fill the seat of former Senator Marco Rubio, who left office to become the Secretary of State. So who is Angie Nixon? Well, she is actually a Democratic Socialist, and she's going to run against Republican Ashley Moody. And I'm thinking that Moody will probably win handily. But some Democratic Socialists are promising some very big things, like we saw in the New York mayor's race that brought about a victory for that New York mayor. Promising things is a proven way to get votes. But what is a Democratic Socialist? And they think they're great, of course, but what are we to think? If the Democrats keep bringing in more and more Democratic Socialists, what's going to happen to the country? They think it'll be great. What are we to think? We're going to get Mike Sharman on the phone line. He's an attorney near Washington, D.C. He's also the general counsel for the Christian healthcare sharing plan called Share Healthcare, which you can read more about at sharehealthcare.com. But Mike Sharman, we're diving into this topic of democratic socialism. What do you have to say about it?
Well, if everybody wants more taxes and less freedom, then they might want to be focusing on democratic socialists. If they want to have more freedom and less taxes, they might want to be focusing on democratic socialists and how to defeat them. That's the thumbnail sketch. You know, the Democratic Socialists of America is the communist movement in America. I mean, that is what it is, and they don't pretend to be anything else. One of their delegates at their recent convention just stood up on the stage and said, "Our goal is communism." That was the quote, "Our goal is communism," and she got huge applause. So if you look up their platform, you'll see what they're for, what the Democratic Socialists have put in their party platform. They want a 32-hour work week with full pay and benefits, which are really big benefits. Then you have that short work week, but then you get a lot of paid family leave. They say a living minimum wage, which your candidate down there, Angie Nixon, says that would be $25 per hour, which means there'd be a whole lot of small businesses closing. The big businesses that could afford to pass on that $25 per hour would, but then whatever they're selling or serving, those prices will go up to the people who could still afford to do them. So that means a few more of those big businesses would go under also. Universal health care at no cost for anybody. Expanded public hospitals, which essentially they'd all become public if there's universal health care for everybody. And then free medical education. Okay? Now, universal health care at no cost. Well, at no cost to who?
Right.
Government doesn't generate money on its own. It prints money, but ultimately that does have to be paid off. The debt on our economy now is one of the largest parts of our budget, paying the debt on our budget rather, not on our economy. So universal health care at no cost is a lie in 5 words? Universal health care at no cost, because it is a cost. It's at a very substantial cost. That would be, your taxes would increase at least 20%. At least 20%. Then free public education all the way through college. And then for those who have already done college and promised to pay back the money they borrowed, those debts would be canceled. They declare that housing is a human right, which means much more public housing, which wherever you see an increase in public housing, you're going to see an increase in the cost of rents for everybody, because that public housing isn't free. It is paid for by the government at a level that they negotiate with the owner of those public housing areas. That's just all there is to it. When you have Section 8 housing coming in, it increases the rents of everything else around it. So that's creating more problems for the people at those working class rent levels, let's say. That whereas before, let's say they might have been able to get a nice 3-bedroom, 1-bath for $700, no more. That's about an $1,800 minimum dollar rent because the Section 8 will pay that amount. So those are the ones on just the economy. For the basic system of our government, they're wanting to wipe out so much of our Constitution. They want to wipe out the Senate, which takes care of that check and balance between the Senate and House. They just want to abolish it. They want to make everything the House of Representatives, which means only the urban areas would really have power. Because the urban areas, since the House of Representatives is based on population, the urban areas have the bulk of the population. That's why our founders created the House based on population, the Senate based on just, every state, no matter how big in size or how big in population, gets to. So they're a check and balance right there. Well, that check and balance is gone. They want to wipe that out. There also is talk that they want to wipe out the presidency. Well, not talk. That's part of their platform. So they abolish the presidency and create a parliamentary system, which we can see how awfully that works in the areas like Britain that have the parliamentary system, or Israel has a parliamentary system. They're both in constant chaos because at any point in time, they can have what's called, the government, they've lost confidence in the government, so they can call for another election. It's a very bad system. It, again, winds up losing us another check and balance and losing us another power of the people, because the people vote in the Senate, the people vote in the president. Here, that power would be lost. Of course, there's no more Senate, they say, no more presidency, and it would be the parliamentary process that would elect their leader, not the people. They want to get rid of ICE. Okay, well, that's been a regular argument. But their platform says they also want to get rid of the police and the prison system, and then with the funds redirected to social services. We could go on about that, but it's a pretty horrific platform. And what is needed is exactly what you're doing right now, Doug, and that's letting people know what's going on so that they really are, whether they're Republican, Independent, Democrat, that they're really aghast at how this extreme position has become literally mainstream. The Democratic Party, not the Democratic Socialist Party, but the Democratic Party has nominated a communist for their party representative for the U.S. Senate, which she wants to abolish.
I see some people posting online, Democratic Socialism is not communism.
Tell the Democratic Socialists of America that, because they say the opposite. As I mentioned, and I believe it was their vice chair, I'm not positive about that, but it was somebody on their platform, literally on the stage at their convention, who said, our goal is communism, and she got a raucous, rousing, ovation for having said that. The Democratic Socialists of America are communist, and their goal is communism. There are different countries in which there's a lot of socialist activity. Our nation has a lot of socialist activity. We have social services. We have Medicare. We have Medicaid. We have a lot of social welfare, not just for people, but we have social welfare for corporations. We have assistance to the farm. So we have a lot of socialist policies that people don't think of as socialism. But we're inherently a capitalist republic that has democratic principles of we the people vote, and we also have a system that has checks and balances. This system has no checks and balances. It is essentially what they're wanting to recreate as a Politburo, the Soviet Union Politburo. That is their structure. And the Angie Nixon, who's the Florida Senate candidate, she's reciting these same things. You look at pretty much any one of her interviews in which she's being asked what will she support, and it's each one of these things: $25 an hour federal minimum wage, Medicare for all, billionaire tax, state-provided child care, a national rent freeze, public college for all, canceling student debt. Those are what she's putting in. Those same things we just talked about as the Democratic Socialists of America party platform. That's the same thing that she's saying. You had mentioned also the startling thing of the difference in funding of the mainstream Democratic candidate and the Democratic Socialist candidate. So Nixon raised $975,000. Vindman raised $16.3 million. Nixon spent $60,000 in advertising. Vindman spent $2.2 million. I think the total that Vindman spent for his race was $8 million, and the total that Nixon spent for her race was $700,000. Huge difference. And why did she win with that huge imbalance in income? Well, because it's a primary. And in primary, the most active members of that party are the ones that win the election. And in this case, the Democrat Socialists were much more active, much more interested than the mainstream Democrats down there in Florida. And that's happening in a number of places. Vindman's brother, Eugene, your Vindman was Alex Vindman. His brother, Eugene, is a congressman that's in my district, the 7th District of Virginia. And he has a Democrat Socialist opposing him also, not in a primary. His primary went unopposed. She's actually running as a Democrat Socialist, but is hoping to have him lose, which would be great for us, lose to the Republican so that she can then run as the Democratic Party candidate in the next cycle. Remember, these House seats, you're always campaigning. It's only 2 years away from the next election.
Right. I started off this interview by saying that the Democratic Socialists promise very big things, and you just detailed some of those very big things that a lot of voters, if they're not stopping and thinking about the long term and about the big picture, they're just thinking of what's good for me today. Why, if I have a student loan and Angie Nixon's going to knock out my student loan, wow, I'm going to vote for her. Wow, I'm making minimum wage. She's going to jack that up. Wow, I'm going to vote for her. So what can we say to help open and enlighten minds that, hey, just because, yes, that would give you a personal short-term improvement, overall, it's a downhill slide towards trouble?
Well, it's really an immediate slide towards trouble. Just think of the one of the things that they're proposing, abolishing the police. Do you really think a social worker is going to be helping you when somebody's mugging you on the street? Is a group of social workers coming in going to help when you have a gang of people taking over a retail store? And that's not fiction. Those are things that are happening now.
Yeah.
You need to have police. You need to have armed police. And then abolishing incarceration. Well, that is just a fantasy that anybody who even stops and thinks about it knows that's not going to work. You have to have some ultimate punishment. The people that actually wind up getting incarcerated, it's extremely rare that somebody gets incarcerated for their first offense. Probably one of the few people is that woman in Colorado who got incarcerated as a 70-year-old grandmother because she kept a thumb drive of the votes as the clerk of court because she knew that somebody was cheating. And so they then, trumped up a charge on her, and as a grandma, she went down the road for the first offense. That's rare. What normally happens is you get arrested the first time. Let's say you do a couple burglaries. Well, you'll get arrested. You'll go before the judge on your first probable cause hearing, and you'll get your attorney. Your attorney will talk to the prosecutor and say, hey, it's first offense. Let's drop this down to let's call it a trespass and a petty larceny, all right? That's what will happen. Probation, no time. Then the person goes on, a year or two later, they do another crime, and let's say it's another larceny crime. All right, so now you get bumped up to being charged with an actual felony. But, hey, it's his first felony, so that's pretty serious consequence. Now, how about just time served? He's been in jail since, got arrested. It's been a month and a half. Time served and then probation, all right? Okay, fine. Then third time, your second felony, going to go down the road, but for a relatively short time, 2 years, maybe 3 years. By then, pretty hardened criminal because he keeps thinking, I can get away with it, I can get away with it, I can get away with it. They aren't really going to do anything because he's only getting time on the things he was caught on, not on the ones he wasn't, which are a lot more crimes. So then he's also pretty bitter, and then he'll go to, instead of a burglary, armed robbery. And, I'm not making up fact patterns that I haven't seen repeated many times. We need police. We need incarceration. Like I was bringing out in this point, the people who are actually incarcerated are the ones who are repeat criminals. We need them incarcerated. We need the public to be protected from them. That's why. They aren't civilized. They aren't willing to be in a civil society. That's why they literally need to be in a cage. Uncaged, they're going to hurt people or their property, one or the other. They're going to disquiet the community. We wish there was another way. There's all sorts of things that are in place already to try to help. If anybody wants diversion from the incarceration, it's there if they want it already. That's the easiest thing to do when you're representing a person who's been charged with a crime is say to the prosecutor, what would you like this side of incarceration? My client is very, very remorseful about this. He's willing to do restitution, do whatever treatment program you're talking about. You come to a prosecutor with a presentation like that, that person is not going to do time unless the prosecutor's been lied to by that person many times before.
So why does the Democratic Socialist think it's a good plan to do away with police and incarceration?
Well, what would occur if you have all the outlaws out on the street?
Of course, it'd be mayhem.
And then if you have mayhem, what are you then going to need to control it?
I guess you'll suddenly have to have, I always say the strong man, the strong.
Exactly.
That's why you'll never have anarchy, in my opinion, is because as soon as things start to get crazy, the strong man will arise and take control.
Right. And that's classic Marxist theory. That is what Karl Marx said. He said, we go from capitalism to socialism. And in between socialism and communism, there will be a time of chaos because socialism won't work. And it'll create that time of chaos, aka anarchy, which will have to be overcome by a dictatorial government. That's why the Democratic Socialists want it. Classic phrase of burgeoning communist is when comes the revolution? When comes the revolution? Not as a question, but when it comes. When the revolution comes. Well, when is it going to come? When there is disorder and chaos. And then they can take over. Power abhors a vacuum. Mm-hmm. Socialism won't work. It'll collapse. It'll collapse the economy. It'll collapse the social structure because socialism, of course, wants, to abolish marriage and to abolish family. So you wiped out the social structure right there. And then you wipe out the economy by promising all these things and trying to do them that won't work, and you've wiped out capitalism because you've taxed the people who otherwise would have been able to support normal things with a normal tax basis. But that's collapsed, and governments had to shore up this, shore up that, take over this part of the economy, take over that part of the economy. That doesn't work because who do you have left to tax? And then you get anarchy, which then brings on the need for a warlord, essentially, to take over, who says that he's not a warlord, who says that he is there as the harbinger of peace and he's going to help bring it about, but you're going to have to keep him in office, say 40, 50 years.
And just put this little mark on your forehead while you're at it.
Yep. That is the ultimate dictator. Right.
So as we take a turn toward the finish line here with Mike Sharman. One of the things about democratic socialism is they definitely want to put their fingers fully in the pie of healthcare. So talk about that and then talk about the share healthcare alternative.
Well, what does everybody need? Everybody at some time or another will need healthcare. So if you're wanting to put your handcuffs on society and put your handcuffs on them in one way, bribe them in another, what are you going to do? You're going to control healthcare because everybody needs it at one time or another and many times during their life. So that's why they want to control healthcare. But then what does that do? It Sovietizes healthcare to where there's one group of decision makers about it, which means less choice and less innovation, which means bad healthcare. It also means that it will cost more one way or another. Cost it more in taxes, cost it more in freedom, or both. With those things that we've just been talking about, the awfulness of the Democratic Socialists, the bleakness of the Marxist theory of go from capitalism to socialism to the anarchy to communism. None of those things need to be done, and we really, I think we're at a place in our culture and our society where we're seeing those things come up as strong possibilities, and I think we're still a moral enough society, a sane enough society that we can look at, oh man, is that where we've been going? Let's stop. Let's turn around. Let's use the freedoms we have. One of those freedoms is what else can you do about healthcare for yourself to pull out of the system? You know, when our folks go out to events now, they have the stands that we normally do and the signs and all that. But we've started putting up a handmade sign, a little tent, cardboard sign that we put on the table saying no government involved. Well, that pulls them in because people want freedom. So Share Healthcare is a 501c3 nonprofit. It's a Christian ministry whose specific goal is to help Christians share one another's medically necessary medical expenses. So a person who joins as a member has the freedom of going to any licensed medical professional in the world. That person that they choose as their provider is not dictated by us as to what type of care they can get. They talk it over with their patient, use their expertise, and give them what care is necessary. Again, wherever they are in the world, wherever they are in the United States, wherever they are in your town. You're not stuck with one network of providers. So you have that freedom. You have the financial freedom because we're only $149 for a single, $249 for a couple, and $349 for a family of four, and then $50 for each child after that. So that's a huge economic freedom. And you can look at the difference of government and monopoly companies controlled healthcare versus what freedom does. So we're, again, use the example of the family, $349 for a family of four. The national average for insurance, which is dictated to by the government and owned by oligarchies, let's say a group of monopolies. Some geographic areas may have monopolies, but it is essentially an oligarchical entity. And so they're $2,684 as an average. $349 for freedom with Share Healthcare, $2,684 with the system that is run by governments and massive corporations. That's a huge difference. Plus, we have spiritual freedom, religious freedom. We're able to share in accordance with our beliefs. We're able to structure the ministry in a way in accordance with our beliefs. We're able to say, this is for Christians, it's not for everyone. It is for Christians. Freedom, when you exercise your freedom muscle, good things happen. How do I know that? $349 versus $2,684. That's the objective proof. Plus the fact that it's functional, it works. But you can just look at anything else that you see where we've been given freedom. The reason we're in our 250th anniversary of our nation's birth is because it was birthed upon freedom. And the checks and balances recognize, okay, we got freedom, but you know what? Have you ever met people? They tend to work toward corruption. Okay, then let's put checks and balances in place so that one entity, one strata of society puts a check and balance on the other. The Senate is a check and balance on the Congress. That legislature is checked and balanced by the executive. That executive and legislature are checked and balanced by the judiciary. And then that's replicated in the states themselves. The states themselves have their own, normally bicameral, two-house legislature. Nebraska's unique with just a unicameral. But then they also have the check and balance of their governor and their courts. But then all of that's balanced by we the people in our vote. It's balanced by we the people in our market choices. It's balanced by business who do get to lobby government to do this, that, and the other. All of it is balanced also with the churches and their moral suasion that they really need to be bringing on. Freedom is what it's about, and that's what Share Healthcare is trying to give people the opportunity to exercise their freedom muscles in that way.
If people want to find out more of how to do that with Share Healthcare, what's their next step?
Well, remember our name. That's the first step, probably, Share Healthcare. And then look up sharehealthcare.com, sharehealthcare.com. Write down whatever questions you might have, and then call 1-844-SHARE-HC, 1-844-SHARE-HC.
I read a quote that said that one of the things a socialist never solves a problem with more freedom.
Boy, that seems like an apt quote.
So exercise that freedom muscle. I also like what you said about checks and balances. Have you ever met people?
Right.
All right, that's Mike Sharman with Share Healthcare, sharehealthcare.com, the website, or call 1-844-SHARE-HC and talk to somebody. And for Wave 94, I'm Doug Apple.